Welcome to a special edition of Takedown with Chris Hansen. I'm Chris Hansen, and if you are a fan of true crime, and if you're watching this show, you likely are, the gentlemen joining me for this show will be no strangers to you. The Behavior Panel is a group of guys from the worlds of intelligence, military, law enforcement, who break down the criminal mind, criminal behavior, and the criminals themselves in a very entertaining and compelling way. And I am honored to have these guys join me: Greg Hartley, Scott Rouse, Mark Bowden, Chase Hughes, some of whom I ran into recently at CrimeCon, and we got to talking about collaborations, and I thought it would be a natural. And I'm a big fan of these guys on YouTube and their network television shows called The Behavior Panel. So welcome all of you to Takedown with Chris Hansen. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, thanks, Chris.
As I mentioned, and we'll get into your backgrounds and we'll post your bios here on TruBlu. You guys spent a lot of time trying to understand why these guys do what they do. And I do the same thing in the predator investigations. And I hear certain things over and over again. And I want to play for you some excerpts of the predators I've caught. And you guys have gone over them, and so you're very familiar here. But the first guy surfaced in one of our investigations in Polk County, Florida. Sheriff Grady Judd's team down there does a lot of work, sting operations, exposing people in the human trafficking world and predators going after children. And this fellow, Juan Miguel, who was at the time 35 years old, worked for a software company that created technology and firewalls to protect children from predators. And here he is surfacing in this sting operation looking to meet a child. Let's take a look at the first clip.
I was on Passions trying to see if I can have sex with someone. And when I spoke to this lady, she tried to have her daughter take her place, I guess. I don't know how to phrase it.
Okay, so you were talking to a woman.
Yes.
And you were online to have a romantic liaison, sexual liaison.
Yes.
And then it transitioned into a discussion with her 14-year-old daughter.
Yes.
Scott, let's go to you first. This was a scenario where the undercover posed as a woman, an adult woman, who was willing to essentially sell her 14-year-old daughter for sex. When you see this first clip, what do you hear from Juan Miguel?
Well, I hear him being fairly quiet. And that's what happens quite often when you're talking to someone who is, when they're busted and they're trying to keep that in. They don't want to tell you what they're telling you. Their voice goes really low. Their cadence slows down. The whole system just gets slodged up with, I don't want to talk. I don't want to say anything. This is bad. For him, this is bad. And that's why we're seeing things like adapters when he's got his hand on the side of his face and he's pushing on it. Adapters are the things we use to get rid of that built up stress and tension as we move through conversations or situations. And it's any repetitive movement that helps you relax. So you push on a muscle and let go and it relaxes. So he's pushing on his face, he'll let go a little bit and it'll relax. Those are just a couple of things that I'm hearing. At the end of his sentences, also, we're hearing what's called fading facts, where they'll get quieter as he goes on. It gets quieter at the end because his brain is saying, we shouldn't be saying this. This isn't good. This isn't good. So his brain tries to halt things as he tries to keep speaking.
And if you were sitting in my chair during that interview, how would you handle that, Scott?
I think you did a great job, but there are ways you can ask people if he's admitting to what happened pretty much fairly. He's being fairly honest about what happened. So the deception there isn't that bad, except for the part where it's not really, he doesn't go all the way and say, yeah, I was there to meet this little girl. But you can ask things about the what we call, or what is called in the interrogation world, the punishment question. You can add that in there. There's some spots in there where you could say, what do you think ought to happen to somebody who was coming to meet a 14-year-old girl, a 12-year-old girl? What do you think should happen to that person? And that's the punishment question. And their answer usually will be something like, they need help. They need therapy. They won't say, well, I think we ought to cut their head off, because if it was your kid, that's the way you would feel. And that's the way people feel, I'm sure, quite often when they watch you talk to these people, like, why don't you strangle that guy right there? So they'll say, oh, they need help. They're really disturbed, that type of thing. I think Chase is really good at explaining that. The punishment question, that's one of his his favorite go-tos.
Well, we'll get to Chase in just a second here, but
Okay.
I want to listen to this next clip, and then we'll go right to Chase.
All right.
And you knew that this girl had told you that she was 14.
Actually, some of those texts didn't actually make it to my phone, so I didn't know well, when I spoke to her on the website, she said it was 14, but the one on the phone I didn't know, because there was a little bit confusion at first.
Right. But you asked for photos of her.
Yes.
You wanted photos with the newspaper to see the date.
Yes.
Why would you do that?
To make sure that this was actually a little girl that was actually trying to do something, and I wanted to try to stop it.
You wanted to try to stop it.
Yes.
At least Juan had a so-called plan to play citizen detective.
Did you call the local authorities?
No.
Did you call 911?
No.
Did you report it to the service provider?
Not yet, no.
To the social media platform that you were on?
Mm-hmm.
To the actual, did you report it to the platform
Not
which you were chatting?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
Okay, so he wanted evidence that he was talking to somebody in real time, which says to me he wanted to make sure that this was actually a young teenage girl and not the police, as opposed to wanting to come up with some scheme to rescue. Guys, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll tell you that the thing that jumps off the plate to me is this guy is what I call front of mouth talking. He's plaintive. He's wanting you to believe him. So he's talking like this. He's way up front. There's no deep throat, your back of the throat talking. There's no forceful talking. He's trying to get your approval. Beautiful move on your part to lower your voice, go into that kinesthetic and soften, because that made him feel less threatened. If you go at him just as hard as you normally would, he probably would have balled up. I think if his plan needed you to believe him, or at least pretend to believe him for a little bit so he could start to tell you information. And that downright look and that looking at that barrier, that cup, we talk about barriers as something you put between us, and then fidgeting with it. I call that sacred space. It simply means a person has made their own space and they're making it comfortable, because what an adapter does is makes the space you're in familiar, even when it's unfamiliar. When I spent a lot of my life with prisoners of war, and when they're in cages, they find a way to make that space their own, whether it's playing with their face or something like that. And that chin down and that bowed head, at every time you ask him a question of did you, until he could feign misunderstanding or really misunderstood, that was him avoiding your question and some admission of guilt as that chin went down. So really good out of the gate on this guy to find his spot and to stroke it.
Mark, he actually points to the transcripts that I have there to try to help me understand what he's trying to say, trying to be my buddy a little bit.
Yeah, it kind of looks like he's trying to help you. Now, here's what I think is happening. How people show up in one circumstance, it's often how they show up in other parts of their life as well. Here's what I would put forward, Chris. He's starting to groom you at this point. You've barriered off against that evidence. He puts a little touch in towards it. You open up a bit, he retreats back. He's tested if you'll open up to that, okay? And then he comes in again and starts moving towards areas of the evidence. You actually lift up a piece of paper and open up a little bit more. He's encroached even more on that. He retreats back just a little bit. Third time he goes in, you barrier up towards that and you've cut him off. So you managed to cut off his little by little encroachment into your territory, into what you own, into things which are private to you. You managed to cut him off to that. Others, especially young girls, young people of all kinds, they wouldn't cut off to that. They'd let that person in a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And that's exactly what he was hoping for.
Chase, do you think Juan Miguel thought he might get away with this, might get out of this somehow unscathed?
I do think so. And I think these people have the first time you're meeting them is not the first time they're doing this 9 times out of 10. So they have a behavioral pattern that something in their thinking is delusional to the fact that I'm not going to get caught doing this. And that's very common in the behavior profile of this type of offender, which we can talk about later for sure.
Well, it seems to me, in having come face to face with 600 or so of these guys, Scott, that on their way to meet this girl, they've already come up with their excuses. if I get caught, here's what I'm going to say. Right? It's
And
fair?
yeah. Oh yeah. And you can see them going through that as they spit that out as they go through the thing, because like you said, it's a prepared answer or a prepared excuse. The problem with it is they don't talk it out loud. They don't say anything about it out loud. It just, they haven't structured it. They just said, okay, if I get caught, I'm going to say, and it's just the concept of I was going to do this other thing. They don't work out the details, and that's how you get them every time, because as they don't go into the details, the structure of that story will change, and you can see them up there thinking about it when you talk to them, and you see that little pause as you ask a question, and their voice will slow down, or you'll have spaces in between as they have that inner dialogue happening, because they're trying to structure it and pick the right words. And quite often they don't pick the normal words. They'll say, in other words, they'll say I didn't, or they'll say I did not instead of I didn't. You know, they don't make everything smaller.
Well, they come with a soliloquy, or with I call it fourth walling. They come with a soliloquy. They're going to tell you, and they're not improving. I mean, you guys were talking about Cal Dunnigan and improv and how a person interacts when there's new input. These guys don't come there with that plan. They have a plan.
Kyle Dunnigan being a comedian who we all know and is a good friend of ours. And maybe we'll get him on the next show to talk about some of this. Let's hear what Juan Miguel has to say next.
So you wanted to make sure it was a current photo of a real 14-year-old girl.
Yes.
That's what you're doing here.
Yeah. Yes, but it was more so just to.
Well, help me to understand, Juan.
You're not gonna understand, because my thought process was being retarded.
You got naughty photos. No, I don't. My mom said never do that because you can never get them back. So
Yes.
I don't.
Yes.
Okay. But you asked for naughty photos.
Yes, that's. Make sure these. Never mind. I can't explain it.
Okay.
Greg, naughty photos.
Yeah, this is more of the same.
You can't get around that.
Well, I think he had a plan that didn't work, and you can hear his brain. He actually is a little bit of an embedded confession. My brain was racing. No, his brain is racing right now. You can see it because he loses fluency, or his cadence of speech changes. You can see increased respiration and inability to create an answer. He's still that front of the mouth talking. And Mark, you hit on this earlier, but I always say the organism does what made the organism successful. And these guys are reptiles who can hide in plain sight and wait for a victim. That's what he's accustomed to doing, and that's what he's trying with you, and it's just not working.
Mark, what do you say to that?
Yeah, well, I totally agree. And look how he's not getting the results that he was wanting. You're open now around this evidence that you have. He's not coming into your territory anymore. So he now knows who's in charge of that. And nonverbal communication, it isn't just what you see, it's what you hear as well. Listen to that cup going down and down and down and banging. That's defeat. He knows he can't get into you anymore. He's now defeated, and we're hearing it as his gestures collapse, and that cup, which is empty and so very sonic, is giving us the percussion of what's happening in his head right now. He's lost, he's defeated.
And he's starting to realize, as we'll see in this next clip, that this is going nowhere good.
Don't you think that would be a good first step? Wouldn't it be easy to call the sheriff's department or the police and say, hey, look, I think there's a 14-year-old girl in danger who's offering herself up along with her mother for sex?
I was.
Right?
Pretty much, yes, but.
But that would have been the right thing to do.
Yeah. My mind was racing at the time.
Your mind was racing, right.
Now, I've heard this excuse, Mark, before. I was just coming to rescue the girl, going to stay with the boy until his parents got home. He was in a dangerous situation, to which I usually respond, why didn't you call 911? He doesn't have a good answer for that, does he?
Yeah, I mean, it just defeats logic. And so, look, when we're looking at nonverbal communication, body language, behavior, we're not just, looking at what we see or what we hear in the sounds. We're putting that alongside exactly what somebody's saying as well. And some of what they say is just never logical. You can put that together with the defeat that they have. So nonverbal communication needs to be in some kind of context. And here the context is something that just doesn't make sense or isn't logical in any way.
And what do you suppose is going through Juan Miguel's mind at this moment in the interview?
Well, I wouldn't be able to speculate exactly what's going on in his mind because reading body language doesn't allow you to be able to read somebody's mind. But certainly we can look at his body. He's defeated there. Gravity is getting the better of him. He's way smaller in that frame than when we first started out. So certainly I would suspect what's going on in his mind is this isn't going as well as I hoped it might have gone. And he's got this idea of, look, I'm just here to help. I'm not here to harm. And that doesn't make sense with the body.
Let's hear one more time from Juan Miguel.
Do you like doing butt stuff? You talk about prepping her butt for sex. I would like to lick your asshole first and train it before I put my dick in.
That's all I said.
If we meet tonight and everything goes okay, you think you'd like to stay home.
All right, this is, where I kind of have laid everything out there, given him a chance to talk about it. And now we're closing in with the really incriminating, sexually explicit, offensive chat. Chase, there's no mistaking what he said here.
None whatsoever. And I've got a 5-month-old baby here. And one way that we calm her down is just touching her face. And we don't grow out of that as we get older. When our body still tries to calm ourselves down the same way that we calm a baby down. So we see that in him, this hand to face here, trying to calm himself down. And when you start reading those chat messages, you can see genuine shame and defeat. His mouth falls open. There's chin boss movement, his eye contact, his gaze goes downward. There's a full lack of eye contact after this. So this is genuine shame. And then he starts building this barrier. So you see his arms come up and you see him kind of close himself off between you. And he just overall, watching this clip, he is lacking the confidence someone would have if they had good intentions. If anyone has good intentions, they will be very confident in what they're saying. They're not going to struggle for words. And I think he's the hero of his own story. And this thing that we all call cognitive dissonance can make anybody do almost anything. And in a lot of cases, these people are convinced themselves, since the actual act didn't occur, it gives them this little buffer of self-serving bias and another thing that we call actor-observer bias, which plays very deep in our psychology. When it comes to cognitive bias, just look at the Milgram experiment where people shocked a stranger to death, or at least they thought they would. It started small and then formed cognitive dissonance that made them more likely to continue. And I think that's what's going on in his head. He's legitimizing everything that he's doing.
And I've heard this over and over again over the years, 20 years of doing these investigations now. I didn't even do anything. I didn't touch the girl. Didn't even come face to face with her. But as you guys all know, in most cases, the crime is committed even before they show up in the chats, the solicitation of a minor.
Right. And that's a perfect situation. Scott talked about the punishment question of what should happen to the person that did this. And now we throw in, especially at this point, is something called a bait question. And a bait question essentially plays on the fact that they don't know everything that we know. And a bait question would sound like, is there any reason that XYZ might exist? So you might say something like, I know that you don't know how long the police have been following you and taking a look at you. And I want you to answer honestly here. Is there any reason that this would show up in another instance, or the police would have these chat logs from other circumstances? Is there any reason that would show up? And that they don't know what's about to be thrown onto the table.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. You talk about punishment. Juan Miguel fought these charges, got a lawyer, obviously had money. He was able to navigate the court system for a while, but ultimately pleaded no contest to 3 charges: traveling to meet a minor, traveling to meet the parent or guardian of a minor, and attempted lewd battery on a child. He was sentenced to 5 years in a Florida prison, a sentence he is serving now. We see a wide variance in these sentences across the country. Polk County, Florida seems to be among the most severe sentences. But in Genesee County, Michigan, where we also do sting operations, we see guys in some cases get probation, parole, and I guess suppose sometimes that's okay depending on the background. But we had a case, and I want to play you some clips now, of a guy named Childish who surfaced in one of our Genesee County, Michigan investigations. Childish essentially says that he came to the Sting house because he wanted to save another little girl, namely his sister, who's been missing. Let's take a look.
Hi. How's it going? Good, how are you? Yeah, that it may shut, it may not. It's really weird. Sorry it's cold in here right now. I don't know what's going on with the thermostat. So I don't know, it's super cold. I'm just gonna run and plug my phone in for a sec. If you wanna go over there, there's some snacks. I just got some candy. The Jolly Ranchers are super good.
As Stosh has a look around the house, I make my entrance before he can get any further.
How you doing? Do you have a seat right over there? On the stool? What's happening?
I was just wondering what's going on here.
Why'd you come here?
I wanted to save a little girl.
Save a little girl?
Yeah.
Save a little girl from what?
From whatever the hell is going on here.
He is setting me up, guys, to tell this crazy story about how his sister has been missing and that he's been following up on internet offers where young women would be available for sex to see if, in fact, he can come across his sister. That was a first for me, Scott.
Yeah. That's fascinating. But they'll try anything. You know, that was, like I said, like we talked about before, they've got a story. They're out to get into that, to try to get out of it. But let me go back to when this guy first came, when you first approached him, when you came around the corner and he wasn't alarmed or shocked and his stress didn't go up. That's alarming because there's a whole lot of things that be going on there. You've got anything from medications that deal with anti-anxiety medications, or you have possibly, because you got to think about this, you might have a neurological situation where you're dealing with psychopathy or something where the brain isn't working properly. He should have been a little shocked, I would think, to see anybody come around the corner, especially an adult as tall as you are compared to him. And it didn't shock him at all, not even a little bit. And then he just had no problem walking over there and sitting down. And that really, I can't get past that really, because that really that stood out so big for me.
That whole particular sting, Mark, was shocking in the same way that Scott talks about. We even had one guy who, before I could speak, said, "Oh, you're Chris Hansen. That's cool to meet you." And I'm like, do you get what's going on here? What do you see, Mark, when you see the guy walk in, Stosh? He has an encounter with the on-site decoy. He certainly doesn't appear nervous. She leaves. I walk in because he's wandering around the house, and obviously it's time for him to sit down, as much as we like to see this interaction between the guy and the on-site decoy. But he really doesn't seem very alarmed by all this.
Yeah, he does seem quite cool and collected. He's moving quite slowly and steadily. He is threat checking, though. He is looking around him. He's trying to work out what else is going on here. You then come into his space. Look, by anybody's estimation, you're not a small guy. You're a big guy. I've stood next to you. You've got a few inches on me, and I'm way above average height, and you've got a bunch of inches on top of me, okay? And he doesn't seem to sink back in any way. However, the arms cross, and he does cover up his finger joints here. So he's protecting some really vulnerable parts of his body. What I want to point out, Chris, is you're very skillful around this, because you say, why don't you take a seat over there? That's kind of open, isn't it? Why don't you? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But you end that with a downward intonation, a seat over there. So you command him with your tonality, yet the question is open. And what happens? He complies. So he may look, first of all, like there's no worries, but he is protective of himself and he has become super compliant. What I want to point out as well is this is very different from the way you're treating the subject that we saw before. You are matching very much that kind of lower tone, that quieter tone, again, to get the best out of that subject. I think you've instantly here worked out, I don't want to match how this person is. I've got to really command this because we're dealing with a different potential type of character here. So great to see all of that going on.
Well, the other thing, Chase, is that, you know, these environments are different. In some jurisdictions, the law enforcement agency will make the arrest first, and then I'll get a chance to talk to them. In some jurisdictions like Genesee County, I get to make the first approach and continue talking to the subject unless things roll into a dangerous situation. Then I just get out of the way. But in this case with Stash, he is pretty compliant at first, and now he's going to start figuring out how the heck he's going to get out of this, Chase.
Yeah, and when somebody's doing something wrong and they know it's wrong, they automatically, this is hardwired into our brains from a million years ago, they automatically become hyper responsive to authority or even perceived authority. And you're a giant dude, as Mark was saying, coming in there and saying, have a seat over there. So his brain is hardwired to respond to anything that resembles authority because he knows he's doing something wrong. Mark said he had the threat checking there. One thing you'll see in every one of these guys, everyone that I've ever seen, is this incomplete movement. They'll start movements and not finish them because they're not sure what to do with their body. And there's full palm covering. He's got his arms crossed with his hands tucked in to protect himself. So he's protecting arteries. He's protecting joints, as Mark commonly points out on our YouTube show. And the attention is on the human in normal interactions. If I'm going in to meet a person and things are innocent, I'm not scanning the entire room. I'm looking at a human being. I'm talking to a person. So he's looking at the environment instead of the human being. So this is a transaction, not a connection for this person.
This is so fascinating. Because I honestly, you know, I do some of the things intuitionally, instinctively that you guys talk about, but I would have never thought, for instance, that this is protecting important parts of the body. So let's see what Stash says next, and I'll learn more from you guys.
They're looking to save somebody if they needed some help.
If they needed some help.
Yes, sir.
If they needed some help. Do you think he's, based on his body language, still formulating his story, Greg?
Well, I think you own real estate in this guy's head. I don't think it's the first time he's probably heard the words, "You can have a seat in that chair right there." I'll just about bet you he's probably watched an episode or something, and this guy probably immediately knew who you were. And I think that's part of the disarming effect. The minute you did that, you anesthetized his brain, and he has to now think very rapidly. I think he's going to try to form this story as he goes. And we'll see it because we'll see his face change and his brow rise as he's asking for approval. But the thing I would have been most afraid of, I think, with Scott said up front, is if he came in that calmly, I'd be worried about a weapon. I'm sure we're looking for that. But at the same time, the minute you say that, you watch those arms go to the anaconda crush he's going to continually get tighter and tighter around his own rib cage as we watch him. So I don't think he has a whole story. I think he had some idea, and he's crafty is what I would say.
This is the same behavior we saw in Chris Watts, the same kind of progressive collapse of the skeletal system kind of getting tighter and tighter. And when you have a person that cares about another person, they will use their name and they will say her instead of they need some help. They'll say she needs help or Jessica needs help. Always pay attention to those pronouns and how a person references. If they care about that person, they're more likely to use their name.
And in this case, we saw them not use a name of any sort.
Mm-hmm. And he said they didn't even say she needs help or her. He said they need help.
Just to make it even more impersonal.
More distanced, yes.
More distant.
Well, he already doesn't think of this as a person, or he wouldn't be doing this
Yeah.
to somebody underage. It's objectified. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's just there to take advantage of a situation, and which is what a predator does, focus on the vulnerabilities of somebody who they're trying to take advantage of. Let's take a look at what Stash says next.
You decided just to take a break from the roofing job and come over here and have sex with a 15-year-old girl.
I'm not gonna have sex with a little girl.
Well, what were you going to do?
I went to go get a tire.
Yeah.
I seen something pop up on my stupid little feed.
Yeah.
I looked at it. I was like, huh, interesting.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah.
And what was interesting about this thing that popped up on your stupid little feed?
Well, I mean, little little sexual picture, and then somebody,
A little sexual picture
right,
of a little girl,
right,
somebody who is obviously underage.
right.
Greg, the story doesn't make sense, right? He's
No.
out doing his job as a roofer. He's got to get a new tire, and all of a sudden, oh, magically something pops up on my screen. I wasn't looking for it. It just popped up on my screen.
And Chris, you couldn't choose a better ever in your life clip than this one for me to demonstrate something I call chaff and redirect. And by that, I mean, when an aircraft is flying along and it drops out all this chaff to prevent missiles from attacking it, and they follow something else, follow the chaff, it protects itself. And this is a verbal equivalent, but a really poor dismount from it. So when he comes in, he's going to go, yeah, I was going to the store. I went to pick up some bubble gum. While I was in the store, I dropped my phone. I looked down and, well, the problem is usually when you dismount, you go to something innocuous, not to the evidence that you have against him, which is what he did. And then he minimizes, quite frankly, with his language. Little, you see that. He's starting to minimize the impact of it. When you talked about him having sex with a little girl, watch that bounce, that try to get away. That's an escape move if I've ever seen one that he knows.
So when
he can't.
he bounces like that, Greg, what is he?
Yeah, that's his escape. That's release of all that energy that's balled up in him because he has no other place to put it. It's here in his arms. He's trapped.
Do you think he's considering making a run for it at this point, or is it just a release of energy?
I think it's just a release of energy deep in his head. I think he wants to escape, but he's clearly aware he can't escape from this. If he ran, I don't think he has no idea that he would get anywhere. But then he does that stupid little feed, and you say a little sexual picture. Swallows start to come really strong now. He's swallowing really heavy. He's got fight or flight. You see his blink rate increasing. His chin tucks. We consider that shame or grief. And then he moves those hands, to Mark's point, always his first tools. He protects those as much as he possibly can now. So this guy's in heightened fight or flight, and you've got him in a box, and he's like a little anaconda squeezing himself tighter and tighter and tighter as he goes. It's really cool to watch.
But Stash's story is far from over because he's got more for me. Take a listen.
I have a little 15-year-old, 14-year-old girl, bud.
You do?
Yes, sir.
You have children?
Yes.
And how would you feel if somebody came over to a house where one of your 14 or 15-year-old girls
would be pretty freaking crazy.
You'd be pretty freaking crazy.
Yes.
So you understand how I'm feeling
glad
right
you
now.
guys are here and not some predators.
Son, you are a predator. I'm glad you guys are here and not some predator. He's got kids in his life. And that's why I always ask, well, how would you feel if somebody did this to your kid? And invariably the answer is, I'd be pissed off.
There's where you drop the punishment question right there. After you get him to say how horrible it is, you say, what do you think should happen to somebody that did that, that does this? It's perfect. Perfect.
Mark, what do you make of what he's saying now?
Well, what I love to see here is how he knows he's on the ropes now, and he's using suppressors now to kind of go, stop this. And then he hides his fingers, again, balls up, reduces himself, minimizes himself. Consciously or unconsciously, Chris, you know you've got him on the ropes right now because your hands are pretty open here in what I call the truth plane here at belly height. You've moved from originally you were doing what I would call a reptile press, a lizard press. You're going, look, I'm bigger than you think I am. I've got big upper body strength here. Like you're going to stay there. And as he minimizes and minimizes, you come to a fuller height. You're more open. So you know now you can be open and vulnerable in front of him because he's not going anywhere. You've absolutely pinned him at this point. He knows it. He wants it to stop, and it won't.
Well, it's not going to stop because Stash has one more thing to say here that I want you guys to take a look at.
Have you ever met someone online for sex in the past?
No, not for that purpose. I have done this before, though.
You have done this before?
Yes.
And what purpose?
Like I said, I'm looking for somebody that needs help. Hopefully, maybe my sister one day.
And if she was willing to have sex with you?
Like I said, I would have just offered her a ride, asked her if she needed some help back home.
But why the talk about the quickie? You talk about how cute
And she was the one leading into it, but I was just trying to get over here. I assure you. I'm not trying to do anything negative, I promise.
I assure you. not trying to do anything negative. He takes the hat off and on. What do you make of that, Chase?
This is a classic example of what we call severity softening. So when somebody describes a crime and they're guilty, they'll say take instead of steal. They'll say hurt instead of kill. They'll say interfere with instead of have sex with. And they'll say negative instead of exactly what's happening here. So in an innocent person, they don't try to soften severity because there's no emotion surrounding the word of predator or anything like that. So there's not a lot of need to do that. So we'll typically see this about 10 times out of 10 in people that are guilty and they have guilt associated with that word and that subject. His gestures are mismatched with his speech. They don't line up with his speech. And he raised his voice at you and instantly walked it back and backpedaled away from it with a more submissive posture, put his hat on to hide his eyes from you a little bit. And he walked it back pretty fast. And I think he did that because you were quiet. You didn't match him at all with that. You were very quiet and in control, and he instantly realized that. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. The biggest thing that you'll see is this constant eyebrow raise here. And this is how we request approval from other people. This is how we get another person to nod along with the story. We raise our eyebrows. And he has a constant need for that approval there. So when people are being deceptive, as they're being caught, you're going to see a lot of that right here on the forehead. And we typically, in a lot of books, call that the billboard of our emotions. We see that on there. Greg says that a lot.
And it seems like he was trying to engender some sort of sympathy from me with this story about his sister.
It was a good story.
Wasn't that
Yep.
good?
You think, bud? You think, bud? Yeah, he's going to call you bud now, too. I love that. Yeah. I think that's altercation language for him, but he realizes quickly, to Chase's point, that real estate that you own in his brain went, oh, I'm talking to the wrong guy. And he backed away from it very quickly. I think that's why. The story, who knows? If he thought this up on the fly, what a crazy story.
Well, maybe his sister was, we could find no evidence that he had a missing sister, and we look pretty hard, but we don't know. And if it is a case where his sister's missing, we feel badly for him, but it still doesn't justify the chats and the evidence against him. Speaking of which, Stosh is still working his way through the court system in Genesee County, Michigan, and we'll keep you updated on his case as it goes along. Now, the last case, guys, I want to look at is something I've never dealt with before in 20 years of the Predator franchise. We have had guys show up who had relatives in law enforcement, but John DeSarli took this to a whole different level. He was a guy who worked for a security company installing alarms in people's homes and businesses. And he shows up to the sting in his company vehicle, in which he's got drugs. And when you see him, he clearly gives off the vibe that he's strung out, that he's been tweaking. And ultimately, and we'll see this later in the interview, he's very nervous about his medicine that he's got in his vehicle. Let's take a look at what John DeSarli has to say to me.
Why did you?
Because I have a lot of inside sources. Also, I've done a lot of sheriffs and Sarasota PD's alarm systems. And
So you've done a lot of work for law enforcement.
Yeah, my mom's an assistant chief of police.
Oh, where was your
retired
mom? Assistant
Bridgeport, Connecticut.
in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
And now she works for missing persons for Sarasota and the sheriff's office.
So were you ever in law enforcement yourself?
No.
But your mom has been
My
in law
mom was
enforcement.
in 32 years, yeah.
And
So
she was
retired in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and came down here to help out missing persons.
And she was deputy police chief in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Assistant chief.
Assistant chief of police in Bridgeport, Connecticut. That's a big job.
Yeah. So this would be the first time I've ever had a cup sound.
All right, there's so much to unpack here, but first of all, the body language. This guy is wound up like a $2 watch.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing here is a lot of it is his limbic system is on fire. You know, the limbic system is the part of the brain or section of the brain that helps you, that deals with emotions and watching out if something goes wrong, you know, freeze, fight, or flight, those kind of things. And his is on fire at this point. Plus, you add what I think is apparent, maybe a drug problem there, or an addition to his personality there. There's some drugs mixed in. So there's a lot happening there. There's a lot happening there. However, I think what you did in this case, and it's hard to do when you see somebody flipping around like that and jumping all over the place. We do what's called matching and mirroring quite often, which is where when someone comes up and they start talking like this, after a few minutes, if you like that person, if you've been with them for a few minutes, you'll start doing that as well. Or if they'll cross their arms, you may cross your arms too after just not very long. But the way you stayed, your voice stayed, and your voice will match their voice. Your cadence, as fast, the speed you talk will match theirs as well. Yours didn't change. So that was really good. So he would, in other words, you're not fighting the guy, but you're remaining stable as this guy's over here freaking out, sort of. And that, in a lot of ways, helps that person stay calm. And I think it may have gotten worse if you'd gotten louder and you'd started matching him. I think that could have gone a little bit, could have gotten iffy in there.
Mark, I always liken to this situation in these interviews as to being a bit of a anesthesiologist. You know, you're hovering this guy somewhere between life and death, you know, in terms of his, you know, public persona, certainly. And I'm not saying that I put the science into it that you guys have. It's more of just, you know, on the job training. But the benefit I have in the scenario in Polk where the guy's already in custody is, as long as he doesn't say, I'm done, get the hell out of here, you know, deputy, take me away, I have nothing but time. You know, he can't run out of there like in some of the other scenarios. So I can afford to drag it out as much as I need to.
I think the thing is that, you know, you are spending time in there with that person and you're seeing quite an extraordinary character in front of you now. And I think some of that, to Scott's point, could be drug related, but I think a lot of that is going to be more personality. Some of my early work was with offenders at risk of offense, and drug abuse would often be part of that. And you have to work out how much of the behavior am I seeing, which is some kind of chemical induction, and how much of it is ingrained in their personality. And I think a lot more of this is ingrained in the personality type and maybe some personality disorders rather than drug abuse alone.
What you just said is the nature of interrogation. Every one of us who interrogated for a living, and I taught it for years, what you have to do is threshold think. If you push too hard, the person, I want an attorney, or they walk away. If you don't push hard enough, you don't get through to them. So what you're doing, what you're talking about is instinct, is really fantastic instinct, because it's a hard balancing act, and you are doing it beautifully without him getting the chance to get up and walk away. I think it's one of the best things we've seen in a while.
Well, I do get a little aggressive with him, and we'll take a look at this next clip and we'll talk about that too.
Okay, so
I was speaking to a detective behind a mask, pretending to be a woman who actually, through what I found, was actually over the age of 18.
So you knew that this was a sting going in.
So I knew it was a sting.
You had sources
and
in
I called my friend. I told him they could pull my call log.
Right.
I called my buddy. I go, listen, I got this crazy situation. I go, they're playing this offense at this girl's 15. They're like, just turn around and leave. I'm like, no, you know that's not my style.
Not your style.
Not to just walk away from it. I just wanted to prove a point.
Now he's going to spin this whole situation into him being an expert at the dark web. He is the son of a retired deputy police chief in Bridgeport, Connecticut. He's wired in. He knows this. He makes a secret phone call to somebody he knows, and they tell him to walk away. But that's not his nature. What are you seeing here, Mark?
Yeah, look, regardless of the story he's telling you, the nonverbal information, regardless of whether it's personality or drugs, the nonverbal information may well give him away. We've got him moving his gestures way out of the frame there, way out of his normal boundaries, tweaking or not, personality or not. He's never at this point gone that far with his gestures and told a story that goes right across the vista in front of you. Then he starts to close up. He starts to do what Chase calls digital flexion on here. Again, giving us this clue that he's under stress around this. So regardless of what the story is, we can see another nonverbal story that's saying there's massive stress going on during this story. It's probably not very accurate what he's saying. It's probably deceptive and a lie.
And we have to wonder, and again, we'll never know to what extent the drugs he's taken are playing a role in the way he's behaving.
Yeah,
Chris,
absolutely. But we know he's on drugs anyway, or perhaps he is. And so it's that movement that's way bigger than anything else that he's done that says, whether he's on drugs or not, this is deceptive.
Chris, you've done this more than most people on planet Earth. I'm curious, this guy is an aberration, but what are some of the patterns that you have personally just picked up on with these people, how they act, or the stories? I can't imagine how many times you've probably heard, I'm coming here to save her. I just wanted to meet her. I was just bringing her a bag of chips or whatever. What are the patterns that you see?
Well, I think the pattern, Chase, that I see most routinely is that this is my first time. I've never done it before. And then after that comes, look, I was just trying to help this child out. And then this isn't what it appears to be. And then in the most extreme, we see something like what John DeSarli, Dark Web John, says to me next. Let's take a look.
So you wanted to
I
prove.
didn't want. I would never have walked in. I would never walked in that door.
But you walked in the hotel.
So hotel, sure.
Yeah, sure. So you had a sexually charged conversation with someone who said she was 14. Check me there.
You can use that, what you're saying.
Check just
absolutely.
So that's true up to
but
that
the
point.
is this is not this is
But
an
you're saying-
imaginary 14-year-old,
Right.
which I knew the entire time.
And how did you know that, John?
Because I can do things that 90% of people can't with computers.
Greg, I knew that the whole time.
Yeah, he can do something that most of us don't do with computers. Let's go to prison. That's what he just did. So what's interesting for me is I would call this the smartest guy in the room problem. We run into it all the time in interrogation. He thinks if he baffles you with his brilliance, he can get away with it. And the reason that happens is because his friends either are not as smart as he is or tolerant of his craziness. The problem is he's in the wrong room when he comes to the room with you. So when he says, I would never, he goes from almost a fetal position to, again, to Mark's point, big sweeping moves, and back to Chase's request for approval, that forehead up. That's a great indicator. Sure, you would have.
And to Chase's question earlier about, what I hear most from these guys, that is one of the things I hear most often, which was, this is fantasy. This is role playing. I knew that a 14 or 13 or 12-year-old girl wouldn't actually be in there. This is an adult who's role playing, and I knew that, so I wouldn't be breaking the law.
You know what's incredible about this clip that I think is great for just training people in how important behavior is, no matter how much drugs somebody's on, how tweaked out somebody is. The part of our brain that protects our joints and our arteries and makes us close up and protect our stomach doesn't go away. No matter what's going on, that part of our limbic system and our brain stem is always there. So when we start feeling any fear, our arms come in to protect the brachial arteries, our shoulders come up to protect the carotid arteries, our legs start closing together, and he even brings his knees up to protect this soft belly that we all have. So you'll see somebody either lean down like this to bring the rib cage down there to protect it, or they bring their knees up. So his brain is still going through all the stuff that we commonly see in everyday criminals.
Quite often, you'll see everything we just saw, but in a very small version of those. This is so extreme because not only is he using his knee as a barrier, it comes on up and he's almost so low down, his head is almost below his knee. And and if you'll watch, as he gets smaller, he's backing up toward that little corner there. He cannot get away. But we usually see these, the movement will be small. Those barriers will be something like a hand or an arm like that. But we're seeing everything blown up really huge because of that, what we've all been talking about here. His limbic system is on fire here, along with possibly a drug situation here. So it's really a great study in seeing body language, what should be subtleties, just blown out to the largest possible.
Well, Greg, I never thought about it that way, but it is a good case study because it is so extreme with the dark web.
Well, yeah, and a couple of things. We always say there's a baseline that you're working from. And that baseline, I always say it's not the baseline of you sitting at home eating Cheetos. It's when you're in the situation. So when he comes in, he has a baseline. And you see that, even that deviation from that, to Chase's point, his knees pulling up, to Scott's point, his knees getting in front of his face. So we can talk about baseline and deviation even in this case.
And John's not done yet. Take a look.
In the course of this investigative project of yours,
Okay.
you talked about having sex, performing sex acts on this girl who said she was 14, right?
Okay.
You wanted to
Okay. Again,
perform oral sex on
keep
her.
in mind, this is all in my head as
Right.
I'm driving here, that as I get here, this is just going to be like, thank you for, trying to set me up. Have a nice day. But I wasn't able to do that. You see, they just tackled me before I even was able to even touch
They
the door.
arrested you, yeah.
Wow.
He's still confident. Scott, what do you see there?
Well, like you're saying, he's still confident because he's still he thinks he's got a card out with his mom. He thinks he's got a card out because he like Greg was talking about, I know all this magic stuff that you just can't figure out because I'm so dang smart. And so he thinks he has a possibility of getting out. There's still that little percentage there where he thinks he's getting out. I think that's what we're seeing there. Because why, because he keeps going on and keeps throwing all these things in about his friend he called. And all. It's just, we know it's ridiculous. When you see it from a non-drug addled perspective, it doesn't make any sense at all. But to him, where he is, and then the situation for him neurologically, man, I can get away with this. I can get away with it like a child. So he's approaching it as a child would approach it.
He had time to think about this, Chase, because he drove all the way across the state. I mean, he had to be in a car for, a good 90 minutes to 2 hours.
Yeah. And I think this fits the profile. Everything that you're seeing in this clip shows us the perfect profile of this type of offender. There's a disregard for social norms that lead to a pattern of deception in their everyday life. There's compulsive behavior. They just can't resist the impulse. And they typically see themselves as a mentor, or that they're offering something that's mutual with no social norm regard at all. And they lack control in their normal lives, and they seek out control with minors. I have more control over a minor, and I can be in charge a lot easier with a minor. We're seeing a lot of that behavior here.
And it was interesting to me. We were there when they arrested him, and he right away started peddling this story about, I knew it, go easy on me. Let's take a look at what John has to say next.
The person asked for a penis picture.
So you think it was just a random send?
Well, I don't know why you would do that in the first place, but I don't think, I know that
Well, they can go through all the...
I know that the
They
person
can go through all...
posing as a 14-year-old did not
the-
ask
the
you for a penis pic.
100 people I've talked to that I have yet to meet or never met, and they all ended up the same way, where I just...
Have you
play
ever...
my little game, and I never...
You play your little game. Have you ever met an underage girl
No.
online?
No.
So tonight you just did this for the very first time.
And I knew there was no...
John, with all the extensive ability to
When this goes down...
expose these
I
situations.
want the underage girl. I just want her on court to speak to. That's all. I want her there.
It's a decoy, John. You know.
I know this.
Now he's getting aggressive with me, Scott, and I don't know whether he's coming down off his high, whether he's, timing out, whether I'm chipping away at all his excuses. I confront him with the fact that he sent a picture of a penis, his or somebody else's. I know for a fact that the decoy with the sheriff's department didn't ask for that picture. Is he just becoming exasperated here? Is he coming off his high? What do you see? All of the above?
Yeah, like what you just said, he knows all that stuff. That everything you just talked about, he's aware of all that. So we're seeing him in panic mode at this point. He does something called what we refer to as eye blocking. And that's where he closes his eyes, he looks away. When we hear something we don't like, we're presented with a situation we don't like, quite often we'll cover our eyes and do that kind of thing, or close our eyes, or our eyes will blink at a much slower rate, and they'll stay closed longer when you blink. As well, he's adapting. Like we talked about earlier, adapters are the things you use to get rid of that built up stress and tension. He's chewing on his finger, and he's getting even smaller in the chair. And
he almost bit it off.
Yeah. So it's funny, but it's not funny, but it's hilarious. But in real life, it's It's horrible because what kind of person we're dealing with is, this guy is. But he's in panic mode, but then he still goes back to, wait, I got to get a hold of this. I think I can get away with this. So it's fascinating from a psychological point of view, but obviously I don't think he's going to get away with it.
Yeah, not out of this one. People ask all the time, do you ever feel sorry for these guys? No, there was not one bit of that with this particular character, but I always come back to the central fact of these investigations, which is if we're not there, and a 13, 14-year-old girl is there, there's going to be the sexual assault of a minor. And I don't see any reason to think any other way.
And Chris,
correct.
One of the things you did in this clip is something that you are masterful at in all of the clips, and that we learn in interrogation training and hostage negotiation training and stuff, where you repeat the last few words that people say on a regular basis, and that makes them talk so much. So in this clip, I think he said, well, I like to play my little games, and you repeated it, and it made him keep going. And it's so effective. And I've seen it work for you many times, just watching your clips on YouTube and stuff like that.
And in training, we call that the last 1 to 5. So you repeat the last 1 to 5. The last one, and Oprah does it. She's the King Kong of that. But you could be, you're staying right next to King Kong because you do it quite often, and it works great, as you know.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I've never honestly broken it down that way, but now that you have taught me, that makes sense. We have one more clip from Dark Web John. Let's take a look.
John, is there anything else you want people to know about your situation?
Yeah, you can just have them, let them know that there was an imaginary person in the behind the computer that really actually wasn't a underage person. She actually was over 18 after digging through her picture and finding out actually who she was. Said detective pretended to be a underage girl, and I had a explicit chat with a pretend 12-year-old. That's it. Thank you.
All right.
John, in his summation, in his great defense, looks like he's playing the piano there. What do you see, Mark?
Yeah, I think exactly the same. He's playing the piano, but he keeps changing the tune and the keys. And so it's not the same piece. It's not a symphony going on. It's a mishmash of things because he's been making this stuff up as he goes along, and he can't remember the exact story in a linear way. If he'd have done a really nice cascade there up the keyboard, we'd maybe think he would have been more honest, but no, not the case. The other things that I see which are fascinating is he's absolutely crushed. His head is down to one side. He's completely defeated. He's the smallest he's ever been. He comes up to give you this story, and we get this incredible yawn and the covering of the face. Now, normally a yawn is to try and change your state, to change your emotional state, and also to join everybody else in with you. So originally it was so we could all go to sleep at the same time, us and our dogs. We'd all yawn together and everybody would go to bed at the same time. So is he trying to get you to join in with him? Well, you don't. And I can understand why, because you are
Wasn't that time to be? Yeah.
yeah, you're not joined in with him in any way whatsoever. Well, I don't even think it's a yawn anyway. I think it's more of a silent scream. He knows he's in massive trouble right now and completely defeated. His story doesn't make sense at all.
It's almost a logical end to the interview because he closes it up. He says, and I ask him, is there anything else you want people to know? Which is usually what last question is when I talk to these guys, but he frames it by saying, yeah, there was an imaginary girl and an imaginary attempt to have sex and imaginary to make it all not real. And
there's one beautiful thing in there that he does that is what I call guilty knowledge. He says, said detective. That's guilty language. That's system language. Either he's been involved, he's read enough reports, or something that he's using words that would make me go, hold on a second, where'd that word come from?
Also, I don't think this guy as a musician has anything to do with music except for liking it. So I think what he's doing, we're looking at and the way he talks and his sentence structure and his word usage, his vernacular. If all you did was listen to this guy talk, you'd know he was an analytical fella. right? So I think what he's doing, I think he's thinking computer. I think he's thinking typing that out. I don't think it's more of a musical thing, because anybody who's done music wouldn't vary from that. And I think because he keeps doing this and he goes up and down and all that. So that's the impression I got, was an analytical person seeing it as you typing it out on your computer or the report being made. Since we're dealing with his mother, since we're dealing with the background he has in computers, and he's all, and he's an analytical guy. That's why he can put those things together. So he sees things in blocks and in what should be a perfect structure, which he didn't structure his story well. But so I think that's what's happening. I think it's more computer than keyboard, because he's not a musical guy at all.
Greg said this earlier. The organism does what made the organism successful. So when a person is under stress, you're seeing a window into their history of their life. So you're seeing them use mechanisms to cope with stress that made them successful as an 8 to 12-year-old. So what he's doing here is showing you the futility of your case and how silly your case is. And by just typing up all of this random stuff and showing you how chaotic all of these little details are. So we're seeing a strategy that he has used on another person before. And I'm willing to bet he's probably used this strategy to talk somebody into not talking about a sexual encounter.
It is a little childlike the way he's acting, Greg.
Yeah, well, when he does this, that's feigned lack of interest. He's covering his eyes and yawning. That's the biggest signal he can send you. Well, you don't concern me anyway. And it is childlike. And I think if we found out much about him, we would go back and find somewhere in his childhood, there's probably some of this stuff too. And he learned that whenever we say the organism does what made the organism successful, it's not always a healthy kind of success. To Chase's point, it's just they've gotten away with things, and so they use it all the time. All three of these guys we've looked at, I guarantee you, this is a model in their personal life that has allowed them to hide in plain sight.
And to that point, Greg, look, there are many abusers out there who have been abused, but actually the majority of those abused do not become abusers. And therefore, it's not the hand of cards that you get dealt in life. It's how you decide to play them. And this particular character is not playing them in a way that is pleasant at all and deserves everything that can be given to him.
Well, I think that's a brilliant point. And go ahead, Scott.
I think as well, what we're seeing here, we're seeing the crash after the big rush, after everything's going on. You've been in there with him for a while. His limbic system's on fire. His adrenaline is spent. So as he starts to crash, I think that's where the yawn is coming from. I think he's actually worn out, and he's sort of taking a breather. We see those deep breaths. Everything is getting slower. Everything is calming down. He's rubbing his head. That's what it looks like from my perspective. I think
he almost wore me out.
All that. How long was that?
We probably went at it for 25, 30 minutes. I mean, it was a lengthy interview. Now, he had already talked to detectives, and now, John's got 60 months in prison to think about it after pleading no contest to charges associated with his arrest. But some of these guys will tell the detectives to pound sand, but then they get excited to see me. It's almost like they're, star chasers. They want to talk TV. This guy wasn't one of them. I managed to, push all his buttons and keep him talking for a period of time. But he once we got started, he was a little frustrated at first when I walked in, as I recall, and then he saw an opportunity to once again try to tell his story. And he didn't say as much to detectives as he did to me. But as I said, he's got 60 months to think about it.
Where was this? Where did you talk to him?
This was in Polk County, Florida, in one of the sheriff's substations. So he had been arrested at the location. There are numerous locations where these guys were to meet the kids for sex. And he got arrested at one of those and then brought back. The initial interview was done with detectives, and then I walk in with my crew. And, so he saw the cameras. But I don't think this particular guy, maybe he did, because he's of the age who it would be hard to have missed the early predatory investigations. But he was sort of figuring it out as it went along. But I think by the end, he knew exactly who I was.
Smartest guy in the room until they met you.
Yeah, exactly. This has been so informative for me, and you guys have identified things that I guess I have done instinctively, but you've made me a better interviewer in this case. But I think the important question here, one of them is, how do we apply what we saw with these guys to people's everyday lives in terms of not becoming victims of a predator, whether it's a sexual predator or a financial predator or any kind of a emotional predator? What does this say, and what are the lessons people can take away from this to help them in their everyday life? Mark, start with you.
Yeah, look, a simple one. Look after yourself and look after those people dearest to you and nearest to you. A predator is not looking for a difficult job. They're looking for easy access, and the easiest access is proximity. So anywhere where you or a child or somebody you know is in easy proximities, has easy, predator would have easy access. You need to be fairly brutal about checking out everybody with access to that person, everybody with access. And look, that might be, that might offend a few people, but I would rather I offend a few people and check them out properly than it goes the wrong way for my child. So if there's easy access to your child, there is a potential predator there. Check everybody out.
Chase, I often say to people, when I talk to groups of parents, I remind them that if their kids don't know this person in real life, they don't know them, right? If they just have met them online. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And if people are trying to look to spot one of these types of people, there's a few things that once you see one or two of these start piling up, that becomes a huge red flag. So one of them will be like an excessive interest in minors or teens, inappropriate communication, even if it's just a little bit off color, inappropriate communication around teens or minors, secretive about online activities. They're hiding their screen. They're using devices. They're on their phone at like unusual hours, multiple digital identities. So they've got 10 or 15 different accounts on stuff. There's gift giving. They're giving, even if that's not the intended target, they're still engaging in that weird kind of unusual gift giving behavior. Then there's isolation, trying to kind of separate it. Let's get you over here from your mom. Your mom's over here. Let me kind of isolate you somehow. And then boundary crossing is really big. Just kind of ignoring, not just grabbing somebody's butt, but like ignoring the socially accepted personal boundaries that we have, especially with minors. And then finally, if you see somebody engaging even with adults in chronic manipulative behavior, like guilt, flattery, threats to influence a person's decisions, you bet they're going to be doing it with kids too.
Well, Greg, then there's this whole issue of love bombing and grooming that we see in all age groups, really, when it comes to, digital communications and people socializing on the internet.
Well, this entire thing has one commonality, and that's isolation. Chase mentioned it. But if a person isolates you, whether it's with specific language, whether it's with, only through virtual communication that other people don't have access to, whether it's getting you into a quiet space, whether it's whatever it is, if you feel like you're being isolated in any fashion, then you should be very careful, because people don't do things like this out in the open. People don't take your money out in the open. They don't want an audience when they're doing these things. To Mark's point, they're going to go after the easiest mark. And if you're vulnerable because you're young and you want admiration, or you're, socially awkward, or there could be a list of 50. If you're socially awkward, if you are vulnerable and you find a person who is plugging into you and fulfilling that need, you need to be very careful of that person. And I've said this to people all the time. If you feel really good in the presence of a person, and then when they walk away, you wonder why, you're being worked, and you need to be very careful.
One thing I've told my kids all their whole life growing up, since they were 3 years old, if an adult ever tells you to keep a secret, something is very wrong, and you should be scared about that. If any grown-up tells you to keep a secret, you need to be very scared.
I'm going to be using that in my next presentation. Scott, what's the most important piece of advice you can give people to prevent themselves from becoming prey to one of these people?
I would say when it comes to children, watch their behavior as people enter the room, especially small children. What do they do? How do they act toward that person? When the person comes in the room, do you see them sort of turn away and guard their genitals when that person gets close to them? When that person tries to talk to them, do you see it's the subtleties we talked about earlier? We saw these big blown up versions of this guy moving around. It's those subtleties of them getting away from them. Sometimes it's hardcore, and they'll actually turn and run, or they'll walk away, or they'll say, don't touch me, get away from me. And that's quite often the only person they'll do that to. So pay attention to what your child does. If they start bringing their arms and stuff in, like we talked about earlier with some of these guys you're talking to, watch for some of those behaviors when they start guarding themselves, especially when they start guarding, again, their genitals and their chest and those kind of things. And if the person comes, and the little children, do they try to kiss you the wrong way? I mean, they try to kiss you on the mouth when they're too young to know about that, or put their tongue in your mouth or something. Listen and watch for those kind of things. It's so important. But watch the children. Watch your children when you see specific people come in. Now, if you see some of these things, it doesn't mean for sure that person's abusing your child. So you have to be very careful with that. But you just have to investigate that on your own and maybe ask some questions, or speak with your child, talk to your child about what might be going on. So it's a really odd little path you've got to tread, but you've got to get on that path and find out if you start seeing those behaviors and they're not normal for that child in those situations.
Scott Rouse, Mark Bowden, Chase Hughes, Greg Hartley, the behavior panel. Thanks for being a part of this, and we're going to continue this discussion and continue the collaboration. Guys, if people are looking for you, where can they find you?
At the behavior panel on YouTube. That's all you got to put in. Just put in behavior, will pop up. Most of the time, it's one of the first things that pops up. That's where you can find us, the behavior panel on YouTube.
Well, I've always said the best interviewers are the best listeners, and it's been a pleasure to listen to you guys, and I appreciate it. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. And thank you for checking this out. We'll be back next week with Takedown with Chris Hansen. I'll be watching and listening.